Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, how a tech nerd is saving endangered wildlife, presented by Eric Becker. Eric is the in-house engineer for WWF's Wildlife Conservation Program. Thanks so much for being here today, Eric. I'm going to hand things off to you.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you to everybody listening in on our webinar. I appreciate you guys taking the time to hear a little bit about our work at WWF. So just some quick background about myself. My name is Eric Becker. I'm the Senior Conservation Engineer at the WWF US office. And I've been a full-time PANDA or WWF employee since about early 2015. Prior to joining WWF, I did a lot of work with the US military. My background is electrical and computer engineering. So I designed a lot of I did a lot of drone research and development early on, well before you could buy drones at Walmart or the consumer drones took off. And then I ended up working with the Special Forces guys and did some self-driving car things, designed tracking devices and other communications equipment. And then I kind of transitioned into just engineering consulting work where I worked in designing miniaturized satellite tracking devices for wildlife management studies. Still did drone research and development, and then also worked in the first responder communication system. So designed a lot of things that helped police and firefighters or other first responders communicate in tunnels or skyscrapers. But really, how my career at WWF started was I attended a meeting in Washington, D.C. and was listening to how WWF was kicking off a project to use drones to stop poaching. And I just listened to a lot of the challenges. These are all conservationists presenting, specifically talking about anti-poaching work, protecting tigers, elephants, rhinos, and other iconic species. I mean, I really just came away inspired and fairly driven after listening to the challenges. And I realized that there was a potential for me to have an impact with my skill sets designing whatever they might need. So in early 2015, I joined WWF specifically with the mission to help them stop poaching with drones. And I visited the field and I quickly came away, again, inspired, but kind of quickly realized that drones may not necessarily be the answer. I mean, visiting these parks, they're vast open areas or heavily vegetated. They have limited ranger forces or a limited number of rangers to protect this area. And the types of drones that conservation organizations or rangers, researchers could afford were not necessarily the solution. I mean, they were just small drones that fly for maybe 30 minutes and have a low-res camera or HD color camera. And it's almost like looking through a soda straw trying to find these poachers. Or actually protect communities from animals leaving the park. But I guess early on, working with the rangers, I mean, visiting these sites, going on patrol with them, listening to the community members, trying to understand how the elephants or lions or whatever wildlife might leave the park and maybe trample a field of corn or watermelons or whatever they might be doing, but just competing for the same resources, just human-wildlife conflict. I kind of, again, realized that drones might not be the answer, but started looking into more of the technology that I was familiar with working with the military, and then any other types of sensors that might help us detect somebody coming into a protected area, and again, detecting the elephant or whatever wildlife leaving the park to go into communities. I also came away kind of inspired by the hard work that these men and women or the rangers in these protected areas do every day. I mean, they leave their families for several weeks. They go on patrol for weeks on time sometimes. And they're really just doing this manually, where a lot of their high-tech tools were a radio if they were lucky, maybe a handheld GPS and a flashlight. And when you're trying to protect a park maybe the size of Massachusetts, it's really hard for them to detect anything. But a lot of times on these patrols, we would go to an area where they felt like poachers might come into, and they would literally sit in silence and wait and listen and hope that I mean, they were in the right place at the right time to try and find this poacher, which is completely ineffective and not necessarily the best use of their resources. But stepping back a minute, at WWF, I mean, World Wildlife Fund, we work on all aspects of conservation or conservation issues, but specifically to anti-poaching, they take or wildlife crime, they take a holistic approach. They try to stop the poaching, stop the trafficking, the movement of wildlife products out of these source countries, and stop the buying by lowering the demand, closing illegal wildlife markets, working with the end user countries to try and implement legislation to again ban these wildlife products. As far as my role at WWF, I'm focused on stopping the poaching. And to do that, I mean, we take, again, another holistic approach where we look at all the different pillars to approach this zero poaching model or stop poaching in these protected areas. We work with communities, magistrates, trying to implement legislation again, cooperation with local partners, regional partners, cross-boundary, consistently do assessments to, again, understand the needs, but also understand the effectiveness of the tools or whatever we might be implementing. And all of this informs kind of my work, which is trying to identify the best solution that will work in the field, and again, amplify the rangers' works and have an impact. So going back to how I joined WWF, in the end of 2014, we received a $5 million Global Impact Award from Google.org, again, to use drones to stop poaching. And as soon as I joined, I mean, we kind of took a more, not shotgun approach, but just looked at anything and everything technology-wise that could potentially help us stop poaching. And that was anything from different types of ground sensors, seismic, acoustic, radar, different tracking technologies to track the ranger patrols, vehicles, the wildlife. I'm sure you've seen camera traps like trail cams, trying to see how we could utilize them to better understand wildlife movements and protect boundaries. The short distance radar, again, was an interesting technology where we were trying to come up with tools that you can utilize the sensor data and some algorithms or machine learning AI to have the sensor tell you what's in front of it. And it kind of goes back to when we're working in these vast areas, we want to be able to deploy technology that's intelligent enough to tell us what's going on, so we could A, passively track wildlife without having to tag them, and B, just understand the environment without physically having to have rangers on patrol. We also work with different software platforms. One of them is SMART, which is the spatial monitoring and reporting tool. And that's kind of, that software tool is designed to help protected area management and these commanders of the ranger teams to understand their footprint, where they've patrolled, where they haven't patrolled, give them a kind of historic view of where they've seen activity, where the wildlife movements are, and just kind of get this larger, I guess, overarching view of the protected area. We also have spent a lot of time researching thermal cameras, and thermal cameras are a technology that picks up on heat. You might not know it, but everything around you glows. And at specific, I guess, wavelengths of infrared light, that glow is kind of radiated the most. They call it the spectrum of emission, but our human eye can't see it. The only sensory package that we have that can detect on this infrared light is our touch. And when you feel something warm, you're picking up on the same glow. We also, again, worked with drones, trying to understand, maybe they're not the silver bullet or the solution, but how do they fit in this end-to-end solution or this toolbox that we were working to develop. Some of the research that we did was trying to think of other technologies that we could develop through this Google grant. And we looked into acoustic sensing, developing gunshot detectors, the same acoustic sensor that can be used to detect wildlife vocalizations or listen to the soundscape or the background noise in your protected area. We also, I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with wire snares, but it's one of the most prolific, indiscriminate killers of wildlife globally. And it's literally a wire cable that they turn into a noose, and the poachers will install these things in areas where they know wildlife will move through. And they, again, just slaughter thousands and thousands of animals every year, but they're extremely hard to detect. And the current technique that rangers use to find them is literally to walk through the bushes and try and trip these snares, or, I mean, they have to walk and feel for them. They're extremely hard to detect. So we also looked at ways to utilize technology to help find these snares. And we ended up developing a drone platform that has a radar that is able to find these snares. We also formed a group called, or an online platform called wildlabs.net, and that was intended to bring together conservationists from the field, researchers, and then technologists into an open platform where they could share ideas, post challenges, and co-develop solutions. Kind of early on, you would think that the world's a lot more wired than it actually is. When you go to these protected areas, you'd expect some of this technology or artificial intelligence or whatever it might be to be implemented and almost ubiquitous through these protected areas, but it's not. There's very limited tech deployed in these places. So this wildlabs.net is kind of the platform where we're trying to accelerate, I guess, the technology development for use in the field. So out of all the technology that we were focused on with the Google.org grant was, we really saw a lot of success and almost instant impact from thermal imaging. And the nice thing about, or not nice thing, but I guess the benefit of using a thermal camera is when you scan an area, I mean, you can buy long range thermal cameras that have, I mean, can see a human at 2 or 3 miles away. And they also have shorter range ones, but the beauty is that the animal or human or whatever it is that you're watching in the video, it glows white versus the background, which helps us, I mean, helps the human eye identify things in the video, but also helps us develop software algorithms to detect, again, different species or humans, vehicles, whatever it might be. But through trialing the FLIR cameras, we piloted at 2 sites in Kenya, one Lake Nakuru National Park, where we put up static cameras or cameras on a boundary and built our virtual trip line or virtual fence. And we also deployed handheld thermal cameras for the rangers on foot patrols, and then also developed a vehicle mount solution, which you saw in the previous picture, that allows the vehicle to almost act like a drone. They can go drive into an area, park at night, and then scan a 2 to 3 kilometer or mile radius and look for things, and be a lot more proactive on going out on patrol and finding the threats rather than sitting in silence and waiting. So we trialed the thermal cameras for about 2.5 years in Kenya, and instantly saw the impact. We saw a reduce in poaching in the Lake Nakuru National Park, or completely, I mean, the number of intrusions went down to 0 in this area where we would deploy cameras, which was identified as the highest risk area at Lake Nakuru National Park, which is a key eastern black rhino almost nursery, where they're a substantial amount of the eastern black rhinos are located. So we also brought some people from FLIR, the actual manufacturers of the technology, to the project sites, and showed them the impact of their technology and how it was actually making a difference for anti-poaching. And they came back extremely, I mean, emotional and excited to see how they could work with us to scale up these technologies. And last year they committed to $3 million worth of equipment over 3 years to protect 10 rhino sites in Kenya, which is 80% of Kenya's eastern black rhino population. So basically taking the technology that has worked in the field, showed impact, minimize the poaching, and bringing it to all the sites in Kenya, which the eastern black rhino is one of the more threatened species of rhino, and I think there's about 750 left in the wild. And the goal of this project, which we named Kifaru Rising Project, which Kifaru is Swahili for rhino, is to stop poaching, rhino poaching in Kenya. And we're on our 2nd year. We've implemented every one of these project sites has kind of received a whole suite of technologies that we've, after doing site assessments, understanding the challenges, visiting the hotspots, that we felt would have, I mean, the best potential for impact. And again, this is the fixed thermal cameras on the park boundary, where we have a digital trip line where we have computers monitoring the video, looking for human movement in and out of the park, and also wildlife movement out of the park. We also utilize drones with thermal cameras, and we use them as more of a quick reaction or rapid response tool to get to the area where they detected an intrusion, and also use it for human wildlife conflict. If there's an elephant that leaves the protected area or whatever it might be, you can use the drone to kind of push them back through the fence and back into the park, because most wildlife they can't stand the sound of drones. We also deploy pan-tilt long-range thermal cameras, which you can see a human 2 to 3 miles away, that just kind of scan large open areas and just provide 24/7, I guess, eyes on that area using computer, again, AI algorithms looking for humans. And then we're scaling up the use of the vehicle mount solutions. Every rhino protection team is receiving a couple handhelds, so everybody will be able to see at night, which 99% of the poaching happens at night. And then we also are using what they call radiometric thermal cameras, which you've seen in airports, or you maybe have seen since COVID-19, the pandemic started, the cameras that they're deploying to detect elevated body temperature. We're using the same technology to see how we can do wildlife assessments, see if there's any way through remote sensing or using this camera, can we detect any scientific aspect or whatever it might be about the biology of the wildlife, whether it's temperature or maybe how they cool themselves whenever they cover themselves with dirt or mud or whatever it might be. So before the COVID-19 outbreak or pandemic started, I was in Kenya in February of this year, again, working through implementing this Kafala Rising project. And at the Lake Nakuru National Park, where we had the system, which I installed in 2016, a year, I guess last year, they had 2 poachers come in that ended up being tied to a poaching syndicate in Kenya, but they detected them early on with the camera system, and you'll see them come across, and they're carrying bags, and in the bags they had AK-47s. The rangers were able to detect this in the video, respond with the rapid response ranger teams, and apprehend these guys within 2 minutes of whenever they were detected here. So the area where these cameras are kind of the key habitat for the eastern black rhino and the southern white rhino, where the rhinos will sometimes congregate along this park boundary. So we really wanted to protect this area. And you can also see the park boundary on the right. You'll see a white spot, and that's the community, which has a really good road access along this park boundary, where historically poachers have just come in and out, poached rhinos completely undetected. So now we've completely shut off this high risk area or hotspot utilizing these thermal camera networks. So moving on beyond Kenya and more specifically thermal cameras, we also started a collaboration with Cisco Systems, which Cisco makes a lot of the networking equipment that you see at like enterprise companies or large data centers or whatever it might be. But a lot of are heavily focused on IT technologies and pushing, and I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the Internet of Things, which is the latest tech buzzword, where you're trying to apply computing and networking to things that typically you wouldn't have any networking or computer or be able to get information from. And the goal is to deploy networking technology that can handle thousands and thousands of sensors, sensors that are battery powered, that don't necessarily have solar panels or can't communicate through cellular networks or whatever it might be, to try and almost pepper the landscape with technology. You see that a lot with smart cities and precision agriculture. These are some of the other use cases, but more specifically to the wildlife conservation and anti-poaching, we're utilizing these sensor networks to, again, deploy the seismic acoustic radar tracking devices to get a better understanding of what's going on in these protected areas, so we can better protect the communities, help the rangers be more effective, and then also help researchers understand movements of wildlife or whatever it might be. Because once we're monitoring the environment, environment, climate, the different species, the human movement, we can start correlating things that we wouldn't have understood or seen before just by using this different data together. So for this Cisco collaboration with the Internet of Things, we're working in a park called Kafue National Park. It's the second largest national park in Africa, and they have one of the larger wild elephant populations, and this is part of the Kaza region, which is so anyways, there's a conservation area which is largest in the world, which covers, I can't remember how many countries, but a majority of southern Africa, where you have the world's largest population of elephants. And what the goal of this project was to try and, again, deploy the Internet of Things technology to better protect the elephant population here, but also the communities that live around the national park. And you can see from this map, there's a darker red area, and that's the Nkala GMA, they call it the game management area. And that's heavily populated with communities that live with elephants. And it's an extreme hotspot for human-elephant conflict. So we're deploying, thermal cameras and all these other sensors to try and see how we can leverage this technology to mitigate human-wildlife conflict, and then again also mitigate poaching or stop poaching. So to do this project, when we first went there, and you'll see this in a lot of protected areas, they don't have any existing infrastructure. Very rarely do you have access to power or communications or cellular networks or whatever it might be. So when we come into these protected areas, we have to bring everything and almost build out the infrastructure from scratch. And you'll see, this is the control room where we house the Cisco equipment, or some of the Cisco equipment, and where the rangers actually view the video or sensor data. And we had to build this building from scratch, and then we deployed 400-foot towers, almost like cellular towers, that have our networking equipment and our thermal cameras. And we also created an air-conditioned room for our servers and other networking equipment. And this is the only climate-controlled room, I think, for 700 miles, which is quite kind of interesting. But here you can see the control room where the rangers will sit and receive the video, and where we try and paint this integrated picture where we bring in all the data tracking, camera data, sensor data, radio communications, everything into one software platform where we can present only the relevant information to the rangers and not have to have them use these independent systems or different networks or computers. And so this is one of the mass sites, or one of the towers we deployed, and this is the typical of the other masts that we install throughout Africa. But you see that we have to bring in our own solar power, bring in our own networking, where you can see some white radios on the mast with one of our local contractors installing equipment. And we basically have to build the infrastructure and make sure that it's resilient enough to where we have zero failures or multiple redundancies, to where if an elephant knocks down a mast, you don't lose your entire network or half the network. So there's a lot of focus on the actual architecture of your towers and being strategic on where you place the mast and trying to maximize the network coverage, but also the sensor coverage for these protected areas. We work a lot through, or have worked a lot through, local partners and local tech companies, or I guess, yeah, IT technical experts, trying to leverage as much of the local skill sets or local manpower to make these projects successful, but also make it where the local community or local companies can support these projects if there's any kind of failure, or if we need any maintenance, or they need to install or change any equipment. And before COVID-19, I would spend a lot of time traveling to these sites, doing a lot of the installation with these other companies, and be really hands-on on implementing this technology and training the rangers. But since COVID-19, we've had to rethink how we work, which is it's actually going to benefit us in the long run. Where now we're hiring local engineers, training local fresh graduates from IT school, but trying to build up the skill sets that are required for these high tech or advanced technology projects. Just so these solutions can start to be more locally developed, but definitely locally maintained, and just help us scale. Again, just leveraging the local skill sets. So this is one of the ladies that runs the control room at Kafue National Park. And prior to this project, she had never used a computer. I mean, she has a smartphone. She was semi-tech savvy, but she had never touched a computer. So it was amazing kind of bringing her through like introduction to a computer, but also like seeing how quickly she picked up all of these high-tech technology solutions, and she kind of owns the system and is really one of the reasons why this has been successful in Kafue National Park. And it was just amazing seeing how quickly she excelled at the tech. The Kafue National Park, where we deploy the technology, is on this in and around the shoreline of this lake called Lake Techies, and it's a lake that's I think 60 miles by 30 miles, or 60 miles north to south and 30 miles east to west. So it's a large body of water. There's community on the eastern boundary of the lake, and the western boundary of the lake is all national park. And there's a large fishing community that utilizes this lake for fishing. But the poachers also disguise themselves as fishermen and will cross the lake, go into the national park, poach wildlife, and then come back. So there was this really not misunderstanding, but the rangers were having a difficult time keeping up with the local fishing community and trying to find the one or two bad actors that are doing the poaching. So where the mast and the technology is deployed, we again built this digital trip line where we're using AI and the human operators to understand the movement of the legal fishermen and the boats, and then also detect people that go in and cross the lake, enter the park, and poach animals, and really give the rangers the information or the data so they can respond and arrest the people that are up to no good. So this is me. I'm working in the field. So part of this project, we also, for the boat team, in this lake is a man-made lake. There's a dam that created this lake, I think, in 1970, and before it was a valley that was, heavily forested. So as the water level rises and lowers based on, I guess, the rainy season, there's a lot of stumps that stick out of the water, and it's extremely hazardous trying to maneuver a boat. During the day, but really hazardous and almost impossible at night. So we outfitted this boat with a thermal camera, night vision camera, so the rangers can safely move around on the lake, and then also connected this boat to the larger technology system or the network, so the rangers in the control room can see where the boat is, but also the people in the boat, or the rangers in the boat, can see what the people in the control room see and better, more effectively and safely approach the poachers. So when I first joined WWF, I did a lot of work with the military, so I understood how to design some things to be ruggedized or last in the field. But nobody could have told me that I would have to worry about elephants, baboons, insects, all these other things working in the field, or these are things that I wouldn't have thought about until I actually started failing, I guess, in the field. And this is a picture of one of our masts in Kenya where a baboon had jumped up and down from the solar panel and broke it off. And on the right, you see kind of the ingenious solution from the rangers at this national park, where they just use mechanics grease on the pole to keep the baboons off. And you can actually see kind of where the baboons were going up and down on the grease. But it's things like that really were kind of a shock or the most surprise for me when I started working in conservation or as an engineer working in the field. And really just a lot of the challenges that you aren't necessarily associated with the technology, but are really important to make this thing or these projects successful. And some of the technology or lessons learned from working in the field, again, the wildlife, trying to keep them from breaking our mast, insects from getting in our boxes, and snakes. We've had black mambas and green mambas that have called our enclosures home, and really just working through these solutions with the rangers or with the end users and co-developing a solution rather than flying to these protected areas and telling them what they need or coming to the site with a solution. We really try and understand the challenge, the problems first, and then co-develop these solutions with these protected areas. Yeah, again, there's no cellular coverage, so we have to bring all our infrastructure. There's limited access to any kind of hardware stores or screws, nuts, bolts, things like that, or to any kind of, limited access to tools. So, one of the things that was kind of interesting to me is I have to bring anything and everything and two of everything, because if something breaks, that'll be the one thing that I can't get access to or I really needed. But yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks, Eric. That was really, really interesting. We do have some questions for you. And before we get to the Q&A, I'd like to remind everyone watching, if you have a question for Eric, you can submit that in the control panel under the questions field. All right, the first question for you. What is the #1 most affordable, usable, impactful tech that can be given to an anti-poaching unit?
So the most effective, well, there's a handful of things that are almost like the baseline of what every ranger should have to, effectively work in these areas at night or safely work. And that's, the essentials: boots, uniforms, tents. Just the list of things that you would want for the ranger's livelihood while they're in the park. But on the technology side, radios, GPS, and a handheld thermal camera. And the thermal cameras come into play when they're, they come into contact with poachers, but also when they're walking around on foot, they can see any elephants, or buffaloes, or any other wildlife that may hurt the rangers. So, I would say they're not necessarily the cheapest, but the most effective tool that if you were going to work with a ranger team would be a thermal camera, handheld thermal camera.
Okay. And a lot of people are asking about the equipment you have up in the field and if poachers often try to destroy it and how you can avoid that.
Yeah, so it depends on where you install the equipment. There's certain areas where it won't make sense, like it's so remote, it may take the rangers several hours to get to that tech site. So we really need to be smart about where we install the technology. And then a lot of the times, once we install the technology, word gets around, people start talking, and it becomes almost like a psychological deterrent. And that's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to raise the perception of risk versus the reward. And once we can keep people thinking that we can see everything, or we'll catch you every single time, then they tend to stay away. But to actually protect the sites, we use cameras that monitor those areas, and then we make sure that the rangers, they deploy themselves where they can respond quickly within minutes to these areas. And then the other main thing is just making them as tamper-proof as possible. So we just make it to where they can't easily disassemble anything or gain instant access to our sensitive equipment, and just make sure that whatever it takes them, at least, just a really long time to break in through the fence or whatever it might be, to get in and harm our system. And we haven't seen any issue with them like shooting the equipment or anything like that, because they're afraid of giving away their position, and they really don't want to create any noise or signature of them being there until they do what they went there to do, or do some poaching.
Now, is it likely that poachers or their employers will be able to develop their own technology that can counter some of these tools you're using?
Yeah, so this kind of gets in, it's kind of, it depends on the country where you're working as far as the sophistication of the poachers, but we have seen where some poaching syndicates or poachers will have some form of night vision technology on them. We've seen instances where they try jamming communications equipment. The key is you really want to make sure the rangers are at a certain level, or they have certain tools to where if they do encounter a poacher that has similar technology or something a little bit more advanced, they still have a very similar, I guess, advantage against the poachers. But a majority of the poachers don't use any sophisticated technology, and again, where they will use night vision, you want to make sure that the rangers also have that same tool so they can see each other and not just the poachers seeing the rangers.
Once thermal imaging is put in place in a certain area, do you notice that poachers tend to move to different locations?
Yeah, so Lake Nakuru is a good example where we had this 10-mile stretch of extremely high risk area, and once we installed these 6 cameras, which are, for all intents and purposes, permanent structures that monitor that area 24/7, they will change their behavior. But now where we push the poachers is a lot more difficult for them to get into the park or to get to rhinos. And then the manpower that was protecting that high risk area that now has the technology can be allocated to these other areas. And in those other areas, we also give them more of these mobile solutions where they have handheld cameras or vehicle mounted cameras or drones, where they can be almost a lot more, mobile and a little bit not less predictable. But we have seen where you do these permanent investments or these permanent structures, it does change the behavior, but again, it makes it much more difficult for the poachers to get to the wildlife.
And once these poachers are spotted on thermal and rangers, go after them, are they often caught or just chased away?
So they're often caught. It depends on where they catch the poacher, but if they're detected on these systems, they have their whole, standard operating procedures where they have practiced these responses so much and gotten their response time quick enough to where they can just get these rangers. They also have other, more other tactics that they use to close all the exits and things like that. But there are poachers that get away, but most of the time they get away without actually doing what they came to do. And we still stop the poaching. But another good example, is in Masai Mara, where we have these mobile FLIR cameras. Before the thermal cameras, they would again sit in silence and wait, and they would have the bushmeat poachers that would come down in teams of 10, 20 poachers, and when they would spring their ambush, they may arrest one person or two people. But now with the thermal cameras, they can, spring the ambush and then keep eyes on the other poachers as they're running away, and be more effective on arresting a majority of the poachers that entered the park.
Amazing. And I suppose this varies from country to country, but what kind of penalties are imposed on those who are arrested for poaching?
Yeah, it varies from country to country, and I can't remember off the top of my head the various legislations, but there's certain countries like Kenya that have strong legislation in place to help deter against wildlife crime. But I can get back to you on that if you guys are interested.
Do you ever see poachers going to the other side? Are they ever hired as rangers?
Yeah, so there's, I can give you, one example. There's a group that's a special anti-poaching unit in Zambia, and they're almost like the countrywide response team. They're intelligence-based. They'll go anywhere in the country, actually in the region, and work with law enforcement to apprehend these people. Their best ranger, who's arrested the most poachers, recovered the most ivory, the most firearms, was one of the main elephant poachers in Kafue National Park. So when they arrested him, they offered him the chance to train as a ranger or go to jail, and he turned out to be the best ranger that they've had. So some of the poachers turn out to be the greatest rangers. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to go into these protected areas with all these dangerous wildlife and rangers, and then these poachers are, I mean, extremely skilled in working in these areas or understand the environment. So yeah, I mean, poachers sometimes end up being the best anti-poaching ranger.
Mm-hmm. And do you know how large of a reduction in poaching of a particular species these technologies have made so far? And how do you see their ultimate potential for future reduction?
Yeah, so I mean, we've seen like in Lake Nakuru where I think they had 100 to 150 intrusions into the protected area every year. And it was actually the place where rangers from the Kenya Wildlife Service dreaded going to, because it was almost certain that while they're on duty, they were going to get in some kind of firefight or whatever it might be with poachers, or that there would be poaching nonstop. I think one year it was as bad as every week they had a rhino poached. But as soon as we installed the technology, I mean, it went down to zero in those areas. And they've had a couple intrusions, and one of the ones I showed you was that video of the poachers coming in. But I mean, it's gone down to zero, and it's no longer, I guess, the scary place to be a ranger. As far as and I can get back to you with the actual stats, especially for the Zambia project. But we almost see as soon as we install the technology, we almost see an instant reduction in intrusions or poaching incidents, because there's this perception of risk, where they feel like there's this technology that's monitoring the protected area now, and they're just terrified to go into those places. As far as the future impact of the technology, I mean, I feel it needs to be ubiquitous to protect the species, but really where the long-term benefit will be in utilizing these technologies to minimize or mitigate the human-wildlife conflict, so to keep the wildlife out of the community areas and keeping the communities safe, rather than, I guess, catching the poachers every time. I mean, we want to stop poaching, but I think long-term, especially since there's organizations and WWF that are looking at closing the market, stopping the trafficking, stopping demand. They're the more long-term solution, I guess, is on that side of things. So the tech really will help, again, just keep the community safe.
How many parks in Africa have this technology, and are you using in any other countries?
Yeah, so we piloted it in Kenya, but it's being used, I'm trying to think, in 9 countries in southern and eastern Africa. We also have deployed this in countries like India, Bhutan, and Nepal. So anywhere where there's human-wildlife conflict or poaching, we're trying to push this technology out. And it's especially now that we have FLIR's, the collaboration with FLIR and their support or commitment to help us stop poaching. We're trying to get it out as much as possible. But for the Kafara Rising project, there's the 10 sites in Kenya. We currently have a large thermal camera network in Zambia. But yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head. There's 9 in southern and East Africa. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you. And we have some curiosity about who pays the staff, how do they get paid, and how and who paid for the construction of the building of your climate control and your towers? Is it through grants? Is it WWF? Do local governments play a role?
Yeah, so we work with the local government. I mean, we have to have full buy-in. Governments are skeptical about being the test bed for any kind of new tech. So, and we work extremely close with governments. A lot of times, like that building I had shown, that was designed by the civil engineer that works with the Zambian government. but a lot of the times it's through grants, through donations from, or collaborations with tech companies in the US or all over the world. And we'll go in, and part of the Wildlife Crime Technology Project is WWF will go in and do a lot of the construction or the funding of the work. But yeah, it's through grants and donations from companies.
And has the pandemic impacted the anti-poaching teams, and has there been an increase in poaching?
So, I mean, fingers crossed, we haven't seen an increase in trophy, in poaching for human wildlife, or how should I say this? And we haven't seen an increase in rhino or elephant poaching. We have seen an increase in bushmeat poaching, and a lot of that is just the sustenance, and there's families that are out of work that are trying to feed their families. But as far as the big game goes, or a lot of these iconic species, we haven't seen it yet. And the areas where the cameras are have actually helped the rangers almost social distance, or it's making them more effective, and they can cover a larger area without having to, interact with all the ranger teams. So the places that have the cameras are seeing the added benefit during this pandemic. It also helps them minimize like the amount of resources they need, whether it's gas for their vehicles or rations or whatever it might be. They're able to patrol, again, larger areas without having to move around so much. But yeah, fingers crossed. We haven't really seen an increase yet.
That's great. And there are several people who would like to donate to WWF for this particular cause. Is there a way that they can indicate when they make a contribution that they would like it to go to anti-poaching technology?
I can follow up with you and figure out how to do that. This is the benefit of being the engineer. I'm sorry, I don't know.
That's okay.
But I can get that information, because I know you can. I know there is a way to earmark it for a specific project.
Sure. They could probably, if you go to World Wildlife Fund's website, I bet there's a way you can contact someone there and have a conversation as well. So, and there are some people who are curious if you have any videos or photos on the web somewhere, or if you have an Instagram page where people can see your drones at work.
Yeah, I'm typical anti-social engineer, but I do have an Instagram. It's e.becker86, and I have started posting some of the stuff about my work. But if you go to WWF's website, or if you Google Eric Becker WWF, you'll see my staff page, and there's links to several of our stories about our work, and there's a few videos about some of these projects. But yeah, I need to be better at posting a lot. I have thousands and thousands of pictures and what I think is interesting video that I should be sharing.
Oh yeah, people would love to see it. And I just got a note that you can email partners at wwfus.org. That's partners at wwfus.org if you'd like to contact someone about donation towards this particular cause. All right, well, it's getting close to the top of the hour, and I'd like to hand it back over to you, Eric, for some closing comments.
Yeah, well, I just appreciate everybody taking the time to hear about our tech work at WWF. But like, I was surprised when I first joined. The world's not as wired as it could be. And if you know of any students, kids that are interested in engineering, or any technologist friends or engineers, there's plenty of opportunity for them to have, an impact in conservation. And a good place to start would be wildlabs.net, where they can, throw out ideas and share. But yeah, there's ways that you can have an impact with conservation, leveraging whatever you're good at. You just need to go out and see how you can help.
Well, great, Eric. This was really fascinating, and it gives me, and I know our audience, it gave them a lot of hope for the future for protecting wildlife. So thank you so much for presenting today. And I'd like to thank everyone who tuned in today as well. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We did record today's presentation, so we'll have that replay on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.